Episode 31. I completed the last leg of my medical training when I was 31 going on 32. Steffi Graf and Roger Federer have made it to the Grand Slam finals 31 times each, and guess who's won more finals? The initial downturn in 1929 was thought to turn into a full-fledged depression because of a series of bank panics that happened in 1930 and 1931. Beyond MD, episode 31, here we go! When I started the Beyond MD podcast 2 years ago, I had friends reach out to me and they said, you have to interview Jane and Paul Healey. And I kind of laughed at the time and I said, guys, they're not going to know who I am. I'm just getting started. But today, I feel thrilled and so grateful to have them on the show. Now, it's my view, and I think a lot of people will share this view with me, that what Jane and Paul have done for Canadian physicians, I would describe this as a beautiful collegial act. It starts with Physician Financial Independence, the Facebook group that they started, but it goes so far beyond that because Jane and Paul have been lecturing, teaching, mentoring, and supporting physicians across the country for so many years. And I have to say, my first encounter with them, I had a chance to chat with them October 2021. And what struck me at that time is that they were so willing to give up their time. That just showed me that they are genuinely interested in seeing their fellow physician colleagues succeed and thrive. And I really have to tip my hat to them because I know they get pulled in so many directions. So for those who don't know our guests, Dr. Jane Healey is a hospital-based pediatrician at Trillium Health Partners in Mississauga, and Dr. Paul Healey is an emergency physician at Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital. And together, they started Physician Financial Independence on Facebook in 2017, which now has more than 30,000 members. And it's a safe space for physicians to teach one another about personal finance and happiness, and does not accept any advertising and is free from any industry bias. And Jane and Paul are strong advocates for promoting financial literacy and reducing burnout in medicine, and they pride themselves on being a neutral, non-biased source of information for Canadian doctors. Now, we hit on a lot of important points in this interview, but the part that is most meaningful to me, so deeply meaningful, is how do we approach the subject of money with our kids? I can tell you right now, my boys are 5 and 8. It's maybe a bit early, but it's monkey see, monkey do. So myself and my wife Seema, we have to set the example. The boys are going to do what they see. And it is my hope that with their exposure, with their experience, they learn to value memories, experiences, and relationships over material goods. So that's enough with the intro. Let's get on with the show. Hey, Paul and Jane, welcome to the podcast. I've been waiting so long to have you guys and so excited to sit down with you today. And where does the pod find you?
We're in Oakville, Ontario. We're at home.
Awesome. So, Paul, Jane, I think if you threw out names of physicians in Canada and physicians that people would know, I think you guys, honestly, based on everything you've done for our profession, you're at the top of the list. And I think most people know about Physician Financial Independence. So for those people who don't, it's a group started by Paul and Jane for physicians and their spouses on Facebook. And it's a safe space for all of us to discuss personal finance. And so, guys, I want to just really hear from you. Who came up with the idea for this? How did it come up? Like, was it just kind of a spur of the moment decision, or were there personal experiences that led up to you coming up with Physician Financial Independence? Would love to hear it.
Well, I can tell you that really the group was created at our kitchen table downstairs. And really it was because I was involved in a few women physician groups, and there would always be questions about finance, practice management, investing. But these were spaces for women physicians. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was still learning a lot about finance. And this has been an interest of Paul's for, ever since we've met. And I was often going to him, like, what should I say? What's the answer to this? And of course, he couldn't join those groups because he's not a woman physician.
Because I was a boy, they wouldn't let me in.
And so we just decided to create our own group. And we decided to also allow spouses to join because just from speaking to our colleagues, some people just find it really overwhelming to try and manage this aspect and defer it to their spouse, whether it be their medical or non-medical spouse. And so we really feel like finances are a team effort. And so that's why we wanted spouses to be part of it.
I think too, it was also, there was obviously a vacuum and a void that needed to be filled because there wasn't this conversation among physicians about what you should do with your finances.
Hmm.
And, for a long time, I would overhear things, in the physician lounge about people talking about the stocks they'd bought or what they were investing in. And I kind of thought to myself, oh, do they really know what they're getting into there?
Yeah, yeah.
And do they know sort of the downside of it? And so that kind of really motivated, because I saw a lot of my colleagues, I know seems kind of blunt, but it seems like they were kind of making bad decisions and getting ripped off with their finances.
Okay.
And so that really motivated us to kind of try and fill the space. And then it was a fun thing that we started out doing. We never thought it would get this big. Originally, we thought it was going to be some sort of book club where people would get together and we'd, talk. And, that's a very 90s view of the world. I realize a book club is a very 90s view of the world. But, and people said, no, put it online. And we put it online. And then it just kept growing and growing, to where it's now over 30,000 members in Canada.
That is incredible. Just as a testament to what PFI has accomplished. So as you guys know, I was doing some interviews with physicians trying to see, is there room for kind of other financial resources in Canada? And we called the project off for many reasons. But in my interviews, I learned so much from physicians. One physician in particular, he said, PFI literally changed the game, because before PFI, money would often be considered a bit of a taboo subject. People didn't really feel comfortable bringing it up, and people, simply put, didn't feel very comfortable with their level of knowledge. But a few people actually told me this, that you guys, in starting PFI, totally changed the game for physicians. So I think this is just a testament to what you guys have done. So just to be clear, though, you guys do have any finance background at all, or it's just completely an interest for you?
No, it's just been an interest. It's just always been something that I like to read about, sort of a hobby. And Jane's always just been naturally very good at it. And so it was just something that we were always interested in. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that you just sort of mentioned about physicians mentioning the group and the impact. People will often ask us, why do you keep doing this, right? Because as people hopefully know, we don't get any sponsorship money. We don't accept advertising. So it's a very different model than, for example, other groups that are out there, right? Where you may see advertising revenue flowing in.
Yeah.
And really the answer is what keeps us going is exactly that kind of feedback. Because one of the things that surprises us about running the group is we are regularly contacted by people who will say exactly that. Thank you so much for creating this group. They're usually people who've never ever posted in the group. Mm-hmm. They're quiet. They're just quiet readers. And they will say exactly that. You've changed our lives. I feel like you've set us up on a good financial path. So that's really what keeps us going.
And it's a total surprise to us. We never expected that people would react that way. There's been a lot of things that have been surprises sort of behind the scenes, like running the group. But that was one, is we get these really, really nice, heartfelt messages from people. And we're kind of like, wow, this kind of makes it worthwhile when you have to deal with some stuff that's maybe not so nice, but that's been a surprise.
Oh, 100%. I can totally see that. Now, Paul, you mentioned behind the scenes. I mean, you've been running this for a number of years now. There are a wide range of topics that are discussed on PFI, and I'm sure you've gotten to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with our members, but just curious, like, what have you learned running this group for so many years behind the scenes? What surprised you?
Well, there's been all kinds of different levels of surprise, I think, if you want to look at it that way. As far as regarding physicians, I think... we knew there was a vacuum that needed to be filled, that physicians just didn't talk to each other about money. They didn't know anything. I didn't realize how severe it was, and how much sort of rumor, sort of ruled the day. So that surprised us. The actual running of the group, too, with the group getting so big that it has influence and power that other people are very worried about. So, for example, we found out that large organizations were meeting to talk about PFI and what it meant for them, which seemed bizarre to us because we're just, two people sitting, in our house, or tapping on our phones for Facebook. And then we started getting, some very angry messaging and people, particular people threatening to, file lawsuits against us.
Oh, really?
And then one particular funny story we had is, maybe do you want to tell this part, or should I tell?
Well, it started with me receiving a phone call at work, which I interpreted as the police looking for Paul. That's not actually what happened. You can take over.
So I get this panicked call from Jay. She's like, I just got a call through the hospital switchboard, and I think the police are looking for you. over your YouTube videos.
Oh my
And I
God.
said, this makes no sense. I said, first of all, who did you talk to? Who called you? I don't know, some group, some securities group. And I said,
Because I'm
oh,
working at the hospital. I'm
yeah.
like probably in the middle of a C-section waiting to resuscitate a newborn. And I get this call through locating.
And I said, so was it the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission? And she said, yeah, I think that's it. And I think Jane had this vision of me being perp walked out of the hospital in
Oh my
cuffs
God.
over my YouTube videos. But I actually had to call the OSC and speak to a representative from the OSC who
Wow.
said that they had received a complaint from a financial advisor that we were giving financial advice without the proper credentials. And I kind of said to him, I said, really? I said, I'm just a guy. I'm a nobody making YouTube videos. And is this a problem? He said, no, it's absolutely not a problem. But I have to read you these regulations, sir. And so he read me some regulations on the phone. And then I went on my way. So there's been sort of a lot of funny drama behind the scenes. And there's been other things too, where I think because on Facebook, people, read us and get used to us typing and sort of
Mhm.
they have a Facebook voice almost. So the way we talk or interact on Facebook, they see us as approachable. And we've been contacted by people in crisis who, are looking for help, and
Mm.
somehow they feel they can trust us, which has been also a very big surprise to us.
Yeah, like I mean, I was contacted by a young physician mom with a newborn who was going through a terrible separation, and and I helped connect her behind the scenes with some resources. And 2 years later, she messaged me and said, this really had nothing to do with finances,
Mhm.
but really she was messaging me to thank me for kind of supporting her in proceeding with breaking up from this in this abusive relationship, and was sent me
Mhm.
pictures of her
Wow.
now toddler and how well they're doing. So again, like, that's not something I ever would have imagined would happen running a financial group on Facebook.
That is a really heartwarming story, Jane. You had such a positive impact on someone's life in that situation is just amazing. Finance for sure, I guess, tip of the iceberg, but it goes so far beyond that. There's a lot of situations that people are going through, and the fact that you're there to guide them through that's amazing.
Yeah, I think the point of that too is that, it's a big part of physician wellness, finance, and
Yeah.
you can't really separate it. And you have to also, like you said, people are uncomfortable talking about money, but I hope that
Mhm.
the group has made people more comfortable and they understand the relationship between money and wellness and happiness. So I'm glad that that conversation is being had.
It definitely is, but you know what? Be careful what you wish for, right? Like you set out to start this book club, and here you are being contacted by the OSC, which I find just, yeah, it just
It's a
speaks
it's
to
a
the
great story
scope.
though. That's the thing. I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. I'm
story.
not. I'm glad you shared that, but let's just go
Yeah.
back to you guys as a couple. I mean, even before you guys met, I'm not trying to go back into your history here, but I just want to know, like, was finance always at the forefront for both of you? Maybe just talk to us about how you two evolved to where you are now when it comes to finance playing such an important role in your lives.
Yeah, I think we came into our relationship with different skills. So, my family, we're first generation immigrants. I came to Canada when I was 11, speaking zero English. And essentially, my parents were educated. They were physicians in the Czech Republic, which is where we left because of
Wow. Okay.
communism. But we started out essentially with nothing, right? Not even
Hmm.
speaking the language. So we lived under the poverty line for many years until my dad was able to sort of get through that iteration of the IMG program. And so we had to survive on very little. And so, I mean, I will never lose those skills I had to acquire. And it's something that we've wanted to pass on to our kids as well, because they're just good habits to have to, save money and buy things mindfully. So I came in with, those skills really well honed, but I didn't have any background or interest in investing. And so early on, when we were in the early years of having young kids, I was very happy to let Paul handle all the, investing decisions. But then I became more interested and I started asking him, where is our money and why? And so I wanted to start learning because I do think it's important even for people who don't have a lot of interest in all of this, to have a basic overview of what is happening in the family finances. And Paul would actually sometimes sit me down and say, no, I need to show you because you need to know where everything is in case something happens to me.
Yeah.
So it's really something we encourage everyone to do, because I totally get it. Like, I wasn't interested in a lot of this financial stuff before, but there's huge value in understanding at least the basics of where everything is. It's like we say, it's sort of a vital sign of your family, is knowing what's happening with the finances. So even just a basic overview, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, no, I grew up very sort of middle class, and my parents, didn't really necessarily go on to university. I was one of the first people in my family to go to university. And so I had a different appreciation of money too, where I had to have skills around frugality and spending. And then as far as investing, it was just always something I was interested in. But like most people, when you start investing, you bang around and you make a bunch of mistakes. And I did that too. And then finally, when I started kind of looking at it more of like a medical approach, like an evidence-based approach, I kind of figured out what I had to do, and then realized that, this was sort of the approach we were going to take, just with low cost index investing. So that's sort of how we ended up where we are.
Well, and I think it's valuable to kind of share a bit of the background of how you learned, like the things that how you bumped around and tried different things, right?
I was going to ask you, Paul, you mentioned you made some mistakes along the way. And I mean, I, for example, when it comes to mistakes, when it comes to mortgages and buying homes, I am the poster boy for mistakes. Like, I've made every mistake under the sun, and I'm happy to share it with people. So Paul, when it comes to investing, you mentioned you made some mistakes. Like, how would you describe those mistakes?
Well, I think you have to try different things out. And one of the first things I did, I was part of a physician group, and we were investing in individual stocks. And we would meet and socialize. And the socializing was fun. That was the part of the group I think that was the best part. But I think our choices were not always great. And I really learned in that situation that picking individual stocks was not something that worked well. That really picking it was more about a narrative and a story that was attached to the stock, and not really any sort of fundamental knowledge about it. So that's what I learned there. For a while there, I tried commodities and that sort of thing, and bounced around and got bruised and said, yeah, I don't think I'm good at this, and I think I need to find something that works more consistently. So that's sort of where I ended up, where we ended up where we were.
Jane, you mentioned how you feel like not everybody may have an interest in finance, but it is important for most people to have a basic understanding. So, like, I'll be honest, there's days in the house where I'll bring up finance at the dinner table, and my wife, Seema, just looked at me one day and she's just like, okay, you know what? No finance talk tonight. She was just enjoying this delicious pizza. She's like, I don't want to talk about this right now. But it brings me to a very important question. And that is, like when you have important financial matters to discuss, big decisions to make, like, how do you guys approach these subjects? Do you just kind of bring it up on the spur of the moment, or do you actually set days of the week or month where you're like, you know what, we're going to sit down and talk about this, just to kind of help couples, because it's a team effort, I think, at the end of the day. So just to help couples kind of navigate this.
Yeah, like, I mean, so I've always been sort of the detail-oriented bookkeeper type. So I prepare all the spreadsheets for our accountant, because detail-oriented tasks are more my wheelhouse.
Okay.
But I started asking Paul, wanting to understand, like, okay, why are we invested in these things? And we do a lot of walking in our neighborhood, and those are our kind of our debrief sessions. We sort of sometimes joke that we go on our walk and, okay, let's run the agenda, and we do some, talk about some kid related issue, and that's when we kind of started talking about some of these basics of in finance and investing. And there were a few times where we actually sat down together at the computer when, it was time to buy investments. And I actually took some notes, because no way was I going to remember what he was telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And, over time, again, I did have that interest to learn. So over time, I learned a bit more. But I think that what's been really important too is, for example, we meet with our accountant together. We go together, our accountant runs through all the numbers, we ask our questions, and we have a good overall understanding of what's happening in our kind of family finance. And so I think even that is helpful, just to sort of have that yearly meeting and to debrief.
Yep.
I think the thing is that, we've been together a long time, so we've sort of settled into a routine for how we do things. That, I take care of the investing, and Jane does a lot of the tracking and, prepping for the accountant and that sort of thing. I think the thing is that when you're maybe young and starting out, you need to go with your strengths, right? I'm the short attention span emerged physician, so I'm not going to be great sitting, at the Excel spreadsheet. I'm probably going to screw it up. But do the parts in your relationship that you're good at and you like. If there are parts that neither of you are good at, then maybe that's a part that you should be farming out to someone else. But make sure it all gets done, and make sure you have at least a broad understanding of it. But we don't set time to do it. It comes up fairly, organically. With our kids, though, we make every effort we can to talk to them pretty much every chance we can about personal finance and investing and frugality. And that's probably the area where we make more of an effort to talk, is not to each other, but to talk to them.
Okay, you mentioned kids. I love it. I want to get into talking to kids about money because I haven't had a chance to pick anyone's brain on this yet, and I figure you two are the perfect people to speak to about this. So maybe just tell us, like, how old are your kids, and kind of when did you start to talk to them about money?
Yeah, so our older daughter is, she just turned 19, and our younger son is almost 14. And really, the truth is we've been talking to them about money in some way, shape, or form their entire lives, right? So we were always very motivated, just given our backgrounds, we were always very motivated for them to not become sort of overprivileged and, have high expectations and entitlement. So we were always very sensitive about wanting to avoid that. And, I remember there was a time we went to one of Paul's colleagues' backyard pool parties. And our son, who was, I think, 3 at the time, he arrived in the backyard and he kind of looked around, he scanned the backyard and he said, "Where is their hot tub?" And that's his reality, because we're fortunate to live in a home. We put in a pool and have a hot tub. So that's his reality. But we thought, oh my God, we have to make sure this kid understands that not everyone lives in a house that has a pool and a hot tub. So, so we talk to them about anything and everything, right? When we go grocery shopping, I still to this day, even though I don't have to, price match, right? And I do it now more to teach them these skills so they have them if they ever need them in their lives, to to shop wisely and be careful with their money. We would, for example, our daughter is a competitive swimmer, and that is not inexpensive, right? When they're in high school and at a fairly high level. So we would talk about that, and not to make her feel guilty or make her feel bad about the cost of it, but just to sort of loop her in so she understood that this is something that costs money and that we have to set aside money for and budget for. And it really entrenched, I think, increased sense of responsibility for that activity for her. So we never really had to chase her for,
and I think the thing too is that we try and take advantage of every opportunity. And most of those opportunities to talk to your kids about money are going to be your ordinary day-to-day stuff that you do every day, right? So when you go out shopping, talk to them about credit cards, talk to them about debit cards, talk to them about the price of things, teach them all of those different aspects, help them understand that everything has a cost, electricity, water, go over bills. And really the other thing is with kids that's important is that you have to lead by example. So it always kind of makes you look at yourself as well, because any skill that you want to teach them, you have to make sure that you have yourself. So you have to really model the behavior that you want to see with your kids. So that's always what we did. We wanted them to be frugal. We wanted them to understand the value of things. We wanted them to understand that not everyone lives the way that you do. One of the ways that we kind of brought that home to them is that we showed them how we grew up and how different it is from how they grew up. So we did a trip to the Czech Republic, and Jane's dad was with us as well. And they got to see, where Jane grew up. And we actually visited, the refugee camp where they were for a while. And they saw where I grew up, which was different than what they had. And so it really brought it home for them, sort of the value of money and privilege. So we've always tried to take advantage of every opportunity. Now that our daughter is 18, she can have
She's
a TF.
19.
Sorry, 19. Well, when she turned 18, she was eligible. I know my age of my kids. Thank you. But when she turned 18, she was eligible for the TFSA.
Yeah.
So, we did make sure that she knew that and she understood how that worked and how the investments should work. So we try and take advantage of every opportunity as they age.
I think that's really, really nice advice, really practical advice. And in terms of just the investment side of things, Paul, I'm wondering, like, how did you kind of approach that with your daughter? Like, how did you talk to her about investing? Like, was it as simple as maybe holding up a graph of the S&P 500 over the long term and being like, hey, like over the long term, this just goes up? Like, did they grasp that? I'm just curious, how did you kind of introduce them to the subject in a way that it sticks?
Yeah, the thing that resonated with her was I used the Globe and Mail TFSA calculator. And I said, hey, if you start at this age and you start saving now, by the time you're this age, you could have this many millions of dollars. And that really seemed to resonate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing too is that, kids follow your emotional lead.
Yeah.
They want to please their parents. And I think that she also understood that, hey, this is something that kind of my dad wants me to do. And I think that it'd be good. And I see the benefit. And so it was not a hard sell really, but that's what got her really interested, was that graph. And certainly they have to be a certain age to understand that. They have to have some math and understand what that means. And they have to have spent money and understand what it means to have that much money.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
And they've seen us, very regularly, every January we contribute to our RSPs and TFSA. So then we've talked to them about that. So again, that's that point Paul made earlier about modeling the behavior, right? It's the same as if you want your kids to not smoke, the best way is to not smoke yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to want to wear a bike helmet if they see you do it. And so it's that same principle where we would involve them in these conversations and say, hey, listen, this is, these are the accounts and we contribute to them for this reason. So there is already that background.
And the other thing is we are completely open with them. So if they want to see the family finances, they get to see all the family finances. They understand that's not something that you share with other people, but we let them see what our investments are, and they can see that we hold the same things that they do. And I think that that's been a useful experience for them.
We'll be right back. So today I have a bit of a treat. I have my 5-year-old son, Zion, on the show, and I think he deserves a spot on the show because about a year ago, we asked him a question that was finance related, and he blew our minds. So Zion, you're on today, and do you want to say anything to everyone?
Hello, everyone.
All right, Zion. So here is the question. Let's see how you do this time. If somebody gave you $100 today, what would you do with that money?
Get Grizzly toys and Grizzly and the Lemming toys.
Grizzly and the Lemming toys. That is the wrong answer, my friend. You get a D for that one. You got an A+ last time. But anyways, so for those people who don't know, Grizz and the Lemmings is this really comical but slightly obnoxious show that people watch on Netflix, and we put a temporary ban on it in the house because it's just resulting in way too much chaos. So as you can see, we still have a bit of work to do when it comes to talking about money, but it's still early for us. But for those of you who have kids who are approaching their teenage years, it's probably going to be one of the best investments you can make is to teach them and educate them about money from an early age. And so with that, let's get back to our conversation with Paul and Jane. Oh, that sounds amazing. I mean, I think that will only help them to feel more and more comfortable with the subject matter. And guys, I really like how you mentioned you went to the Czech Republic to kind of see where Jane, you grew up and your family grew up. I think that's so important. So we are one day going to go to India and I can show my boys kind of where my parents grew up in New Delhi. And I was talking to a friend recently who said, yeah, he's like, my kids are younger than yours, but I'm taking them to Egypt. And I was like, that's an ambitious trip. And he's like, but you know what? They need to see where we grew up. They need to see how things operate in other parts of the world. And so with that, we kind of hope that when our kids come back, they feel more grateful for what they have. And so the next time, when they're in Disney, like they better be grateful, it's amazing. Like I also, when it comes to entitlement with kids, not to say that, any kids in this conversation are entitled, not at all. But when I think back, like I made it to Disney when I was probably 14 or 15 years old, but now it's like we took our youngest when he was in diapers, can't remember anything, but it's just things get started so early. So I want the kids to be grateful for what they have. And I think that comes by exposing them to exactly what you mentioned, how other people live. And I think
Yeah.
that's going to stick.
Yeah, and even when you're doing, it's not like we don't do anything sort of luxurious or, higher end, but we always talk to them about that. Like, so for example, we've done a lot of cruises with them because they were just great, easy vacations with young kids.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, when we were on, one of the Caribbean islands and there's this like long zip line, right? That looks really, really cool, but it costs like $100+ US to go down, and we actually timed it as a sort of as a way to talk to them about it, because it took like, I don't know, whatever it was, 90 seconds, and then we were like, that is a lot of money for 90 seconds.
Yeah.
And again,
It's $1 a second.
It's $1 a
useful
second,
math
right?
problems.
yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't do it that day. So sometimes that's the thing with your kids too, is that you have to say no to them. And as long as you explain your reasons, I think that's also a useful lesson. The last thing that Jane and I believe fairly strongly in as well is that kids should have jobs. During the pandemic, our daughter had a lot of free time, and we said, well, maybe you should get a job. And all of the long-term care facilities and retirement facilities were looking for people. We said, hey, they need help and you need a job, so you should probably apply there. And she did. And it was a great experience for her. She learned a lot. She learned things from an employer that she would never kind of learn from us, difficult situations she had to manage. And so that's something else that we really believe in. And our son's going to turn 14, and we're strongly encouraging him to start looking for some employment as well, just so they have their own money and they have responsibilities, and they get to work with people who, maybe don't have a job that they like, and they get to see that as well. And they get to have a job that maybe isn't very good, just so that you learn what it's like
100%.
to have a hard job.
I love that. That's something I would aspire to do for my kids as well when they're of the right age. And I think just getting them that job early teaches them, hopefully, the value of hard work and just appreciating the value of $1, right? But I mean, there's some hope on our end, because I'll share a quick story. My oldest is turning 8, youngest is 5, and they had a visit with their great grandma, which was long overdue in COVID. And what's very common in our culture is that the grandparents the great grandparents really only will give them a small gift. So their great grandma, she gave each of the boys $50. And so in the moment, we were just having fun, and we asked my oldest, what are you going to do with that money? And so it's whatever hobby or fads like most common at that time. So he was getting into Pokemon, really into hockey. So he's like, you know what, Dad, I'm going to go buy some cards. And I looked at my youngest. I was like, okay, buddy, like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to take this $50. And he was 4 at the time. He's like, I'm going to take this $50. I'm going to turn it into 100. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Like in that moment, I shed a tear. Like I couldn't say anything. And I looked at my wife and I was like, there's hope. There's hope. So
yeah, that's, you should be proud. That's a parenting mic drop.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the jobs thing, I think it was even, we worked as teenagers more out of necessity. Certainly for me, my parents didn't have a lot of money at the time still. And so if I wanted something other than donated clothes, like I was going to have to buy them with my own money. And for our kids, it's obviously very different. But, it was just it was so nice to hear the things that she would come home from this job having learned. And so as Paul mentioned, just working with people who, they were often, recent immigrants and were working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. She tells a story of a coworker that she really liked who was trying to get her driver's license and just struggled, right? And it's something that was so easy for our daughter, right? We paid for her driving lessons, and she always had access to a car, and we'd take her to practice. Whereas her coworker had none of those things. Like she had all these barriers. She didn't have access to a car. She couldn't afford driver's lessons, and she realized how her life was so different from others, right?
Yeah.
And even though she kind of knew it before, experiencing it on that level of something that she could relate to was just like it was just like a whole other level of learning.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Um, what I want to maybe now shift into, because I think, guys, your perspectives are going to be really useful here, is just some basic finance. I want to get your thoughts on this. So there's always been the old debate of, do I invest money or do I pay off debt? And I really have some of our younger colleagues top of mind here, because when they come out of their medical education now, I mean, they have sometimes monstrous debt, far higher than we did, because education is getting expensive and cost of living is also higher now. So that doesn't help. So interest rates are also rising. So it's a very timely question. But guys, I would love your take here on paying off debt versus investing, because the advice often is, well, invest because the rate of return is going to be higher than the interest you're going to have to pay. What's your take?
Yeah, I think first off, we have to acknowledge, and I think you've said it, that the position that we're in is much better than our younger colleagues. And I think it's a responsibility of sort of the more middle-aged people like us and the older physicians to understand that the younger cohort behind it has it in a much more difficult, much harder than we had it. So that's the first thing. As far as debt, we've been concerned about this for a long time. I think our position has always been, and what we did was we paid off debt first, and then we started investing.
Okay.
But increasingly, you can see in our group, and people will message us and say, I'm thinking about using this $350,000 line of credit that I have that I haven't touched, and it's just bothering me so much that it's sitting there, and I feel like I should use it. And I feel like I should use it to invest. And our position has been that you really shouldn't be doing that, because that's leveraged investing. I think that, if you're going to keep debt and not pay it off and invest, I think you have to understand that that is leverage investing. Essentially, you're deciding to borrow or maintain debt so that you can invest. And the problem with that is, when interest rates were low, everyone would say, oh, you know what, I'll make more money investing it than I will. Look, the interest rates are only 2 or 3%. But now we're experiencing the flip side of that, because when interest rates are high, all of a sudden paying off your debt becomes much more difficult. And that's kind of the message that we tried to communicate to people is, yes, I know interest rates are low, but this is the time where every dollar you put towards your debt will help to reduce your capital, will help you to pay it off. And now if you're going to pay 7% versus, you were paying 2%, you're going to feel a big difference. So I'm very concerned about the number of medical students, residents, young staff that I see who are deciding to, borrow money or use their line of credit to invest and do leveraged investing. And I've said very clearly, I don't think you should do leveraged investing unless you are a mid-career physician who has a full RSP, a full TFSA, a paid off house, you have significant investments. Then you can consider doing leverage investing, as long as you can then cover the payments that would result from borrowing money. And in that situation, it's fine. But it really is a non-starter for young physicians or medical students or residents, because you may be in a situation where you purchase investments and the value of those investments decrease. And now you have a stock portfolio or an investment portfolio that's worth less than you paid for it, but you still got to pay full price because you have to pay off the debt.
Right.
And it's very hard to become financially independent if you're carrying debt. So our position has been pay off debt, then invest. And I understand the mathematical argument as to why you should not pay off debt and invest. The problem is that most people are not disciplined enough investors to carry that out. There's nothing quite like agreeing to pay off debt, being frugal, and saving money to pay it off. And we find that when people get in this mindset of, well, I'm an investor now, I don't need to pay off my debt, the debt just never gets paid off.
Yeah, I think that is really, really good advice. Nothing at all to add there, except one story where I was talking to a medical student out west, and the one refreshing part of the conversation was that they were getting interested in finance and showing curiosity and learning about all this stuff. But then it became very apparent midway into the conversation that this person told me, you know what, a lot of my classmates, they've taken their lines of credit and they've basically dumped into crypto. And I was just like, oh God, so he's like, they made a lot of money. He's like, I'm not going to do that. But that made me very, very nervous. And especially when we see how volatile things are. And on top of that, you have higher interest rates. So I mentioned this in my podcast with Steph Zhao that, yeah, I also have concerns about leverage investing, all the reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing evidence of that in the group in the anonymous posts, right? Where, I'm a medical student or I'm a, R1 and, I invested in
Yeah.
crypto and now what, right? Now I need more money to actually finish my
Yeah.
education. So there's some real risks.
Absolutely. You guys had a really good lecture. I think, Paul, it was one of your earlier videos on kind of the pillars of financial independence. And I think in that you went over some basic concepts. And I want to just talk about the savings rate and kind of how to optimize that, because now our cost of living is going up. A lot of physicians live in high cost of living areas. And I think it's important to find ways to move the needle in the right direction when it comes to optimizing that savings rate, because once you save, then you can invest. And I'm just curious, what practices or measures really helped you both as a couple in terms of optimizing your savings rate? Because I can tell you, I give some people a hard time, including my sister, if she's listening. Like, I always tell her, like, oh, you're buying all these expensive lattes all the time. Like, just drink drip coffee. But then when I take a step back, I'm like, what's going to move the needle more significantly? It's probably focusing on your house, your car, eating out rather than the odd latte. So, like, I want to know how you guys kind of approach this.
Well, we're not big budget people. We've never really budgeted. I think for us, it's more about really understanding um, what brings you happiness, and then also the with when you're spending money, understanding that it's interchangeable with your time. So understand sort of really what you make an hour after your taxes and expenses. And if you're going to make a big purchase, kind of say, what, do I really want to work an extra 6 shifts just to buy, this particular upgrade on my car, or to buy an expensive car? Is that really worth a year of me working to do that? So we really try and do that sort of, conversion in your head of, when you spend money, you're actually spending your own time. So that's sort of one of the ways we look at it. And for us, it's really just it's an ingrained value judgment when we spend money, because we look at it and we go, is that really worth it to spend that? Is that really going to make us happier? And the answer is usually no. And usually when you're purchasing things, it makes you feel happy for a short period of time, for maybe a few days afterwards, but it's not really sort of that long-term happiness
100%.
that sticks. That long-term happiness is more from, I think, spending time doing novel and interesting things with the people you love and the people you have relationships with. And those are the things that we try and concentrate on rather than material things. So really for us, it's more of a value judgment at the time of purchase rather than a budget decision.
Yeah. And we really, I think that, as physicians, especially, we always struggle to find that work-life balance, right? Like we're always in search of this elusive balance. And the finances are part of that, right? Because as Paul mentioned, when you spend money, you're trading your time for that money you're spending. And so we really value our time at home, time with each other, with our kids. And so we're very protective of it. And that's actually one of the main reasons we really advocate keeping investing simple, right? Because some people really like to get into it and try and, do all kinds of things with tax optimization and this and that. And it gets very time consuming. And we don't want to spend the time doing those extra things because that wouldn't bring us additional value. So we're very protective of our time, and that translates into just naturally making decisions about purchases. And, again, it comes very easy to us because we come from very, not fancy backgrounds, right? So it doesn't take a lot for us to enjoy a dinner out, right? It doesn't have to be at the top restaurant. That's not saying that people shouldn't enjoy those things. It's just, for us, it doesn't bring us a lot of value to go really fancy. So we just sort of maintain those principles, and luckily we agree on them.
Yeah, I love it.
I think one of the things I'd point to is Jane talked about sort of principles and sort of what's important to you. And I think we don't spend a lot of money on material goods because for us, it's not necessarily about the stuff that money buys. It's about the security that it provides. The fact that we know that, if we had to stop working tomorrow, we'd still be able to stay in our house. Our kids would still be able to do all the things they normally do. We would still be able to travel. And the reason that we have that security is because of our savings. And the reason we have our savings is because we didn't spend money at that sort of point of purchase when we were looking to buy something. So understand your overall goals. Think about your future self a bit, because this is the other thing that I think I want to communicate to physicians is we're getting to be middle-aged now. So we're starting to feel sort of the middle-age creaks and bumps and stuff. And so it's nice at our age to have that security where we have no stress about money or having to work. If we needed to walk away from work, we could. And that is all because we decided on principles early on that prioritized security rather than stuff.
And it's tricky because oftentimes there'll be the conversations about, well, you never know, you may die tomorrow, right? And you can't take it with you. And that's all very true, right? And it's just very inconvenient that none of us usually don't know how long we're going to be around. And so, yes, you can die tomorrow, but you can also live to be 95, right? And so you sort of have to plan for somewhere in the middle of that, right? And so, I think sometimes people look at, your two physicians and, you could be spending money a lot more. And while that's true, we're very happy we still feel like our lifestyle is extremely luxurious. And again, it's something we're trying to model for our kids, right? That you don't need to fly first class when you get on a plane. We've never actually flown first class. Although maybe when we retire, that's sort of something we may consider, right? But it's just kind of, as a mindset, trying to be happy with less stuff. Is just how we are and what we try and model for our kids. And it just also happens to save money.
There's so much wisdom in that message, and I think that's really going to resonate with people. Paul, you talked about what you felt were earlier mistakes. I was going to ask you guys, what is the biggest financial blunder to date? I have so many, but I always ask people this.
I can't honestly say that we made a blunder where we lost a whole bunch of money. I think that the blunder was just in that, I purchased a stock or tried to, buy a commodity and it dropped, and I looked at it and said, well, why did I think that I could predict that anyway? So that was the part of the blunder. But, for me, I think it was probably the early investing missteps of, trying to do commodities and trying to do individual stocks. But again, not a huge financial loss, but nevertheless, a bit of a egotistical blunder to think that I could pick what would go up and what wouldn't.
What is the best advice that either of you has received?
Financial advice.
Oh, it could be no. You know what? It could be financial, professional, personal, anything that gave you some meaning in your life. Anything.
Well, I think that it's always good to listen to our colleagues in palliative care, right? Who will tell you that their patients at the end of life will often reflect back on their life and say that, relationships and experiences were the most important thing and most valuable. And so that's really what we live by, right? We try and figure out what the, right balance is where you work enough and you achieve those financial goals to get that financial security, but not necessarily overdoing it to the point that relationships with the people that you love suffer. And again, when spending money, focusing more on the experiences part rather than the stuff that you end up with that may not necessarily bring you that much happiness.
I love that. And any final message you'd like to share with the listeners?
Understand that it's okay to talk about money, and it's okay to talk about the relationship that money has with happiness. That, it's not wrong to, be concerned about, what you're being paid. It's not wrong to, want to be paid for your skill. And then when you are making money, I think it's important to take care of the people that are close to you and take care of other people, charitably, but that it's shouldn't be a taboo subject. And one of the things that, we talk about when we give our talks is that, as physicians, we understand that not talking about something, a taboo issue, if you're talking with your patients either about alcohol or drugs or sex, if you don't speak to them and you don't have that conversation, it creates a vacuum. And anywhere there's a vacuum, there's going to be greater problem because there's no discussion about it. So I think as far as money with physicians, I think that that's something that everyone should be comfortable talking about and talking openly and honestly about. And I think that's what PFI is about.
Guys, I just really want to thank you both for your time, because I know how busy you are. I know at the Physician Empowerment Conference, for example, Jane, you were on the West Coast. You were traveling, you were lecturing. You guys get pulled in so many directions. You're so gracious with your time. And so I'm very grateful for you guys giving up this time to talk to me. And I just have to reiterate the collegial act that you guys have pursued here for our profession through PFI, through mentoring, is just absolutely tremendous. And so we all talk about adding impact and adding value to the world. And I mean, yeah, rest assured, like, you guys have your legacy intact. In my opinion, you've done so much for the profession. So I just want to thank you.
Well, and same to you, Yatin. You're doing great work on this podcast and getting lots of very helpful information out to people. So I think it's an important subject. We know very little about it as a sort of as a profession, but hopefully that's changing with our efforts and your efforts, and the more information that's out there, the better.
Thanks, Jane, for those kind words, and guys, thank you again. Okay, it was lovely to chat.
Great, thanks.
So
a lot
much
of fun.
for having us.
Take care. Bye.
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 I'm so thankful to Paul and Jane for coming on the show, and I think that there are a lot of people out there who will benefit from hearing their message. So if you know somebody who doesn't yet know of the pod, or you feel would really enjoy listening to this episode, please feel free to share. You can tag me, tag Paul, tag Jane. The more people that listen to what they have to say, I think the better. Thank you for your ongoing support. Reviews, ratings, and feedback are always welcome. Reach out to me anytime at beyondmdpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn, and we'll see you in about 3 weeks. Stay well and stay savvy.